Let me share with you the introduction of the book of 1 Samuel. Today, we acknowledge and refer 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel as two separate books. However, the original Hebrew version had it as a single book till the 3rd century. The division into two separate books probably occurred when this book of Samuel was translated into Greek by the Septuagint translators in the 3rd century because it was necessary to put the book on two scrolls instead of one to fit the limitations of ancient scrolls. After the split, they named the book of Samuel as 1st Kingdoms and 2nd Kingdoms, and the book of Kings as 3rd Kingdoms and 4th Kingdoms, since the four books were a continuous history of the kingdom from its foundation to its fall. In the Vulgate Latin translation in the 4th century, around 382 AD, Jerome altered the title from 1st and 2nd Kingdoms to the book of 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, since the book contains a large account of Samuel from his birth to his death from chapters 1 through 25. He also altered the title from the book of 3rd and 4th Kingdoms to the book of 1st Kings and 2nd Kings, for the books do not give an account of the kingdoms of many nations, but of the kings of one kingdom, Israel. Statistics from 1 Samuel. There are 31 chapters and 810 verses. The shortest chapter is chapter 29 with 11 verses, and the longest chapter is chapter 17 with 58 verses. The average number of verses per chapter is 26. Time span of the events in the book of 1 Samuel. The book of Samuel spans nearly a century of history from the birth of prophet Samuel in 1105 BC to the death of King Saul in 1010 BC. When were the books of Samuel compiled? The final form of the book came together before the post-exilic era. Jeroboam led the northern tribes of Israel in rebellion against the house of David in 930 BC. His rebellion led to the formation of the northern kingdom of Israel, which is called the Kingdom of Israel, with Samaria as the capital, and the southern kingdom of Israel, which is called the Kingdom of Judah, with Jerusalem as the capital. On a number of occasions, the author of Samuel indicated that he was aware of this division of God's people into two kingdoms. For instance, 1 Samuel 11:8, 17:52, and chapter 18 verse 16, the author distinguishes between the people of Israel and the men of Judah. The repetition of this distinction between Israel and Judah strongly suggests that the author of Samuel could not have written his book until after the division of Israel and Judah in 930 BC. However, there does not seem to be any indication in the text that the northern kingdom, Samaria, had fallen. Therefore, it seems best to place the writing of the book of Samuel sometime between the divided monarchy in 930 BC but before the fall of Samaria in 721 BC. Who wrote this book? It's uncertain who the author of the books of Samuel is. The book of Samuel were composed from court records and the writings of prophets Samuel, Nathan, and Gad. The actual author or prophetic historian is unknown, but in order to compile his narrative, the author no doubt used various writings that he found already in existence, including the state chronicles, among which were the writings of Samuel, Nathan, and Gad. 1 Samuel chapter 10 verse 25 says that Samuel explained to the people the regulations of the kingships and wrote them down on a scroll and deposited it before the Lord. Also, 1 Chronicles chapter 29 states that in addition to Samuel, Nathan and Gad left written records of their prophetic ministry. Also, 2 Samuel 1:18 states that the lament of the bow was written in the book of Jasher. So, the author of the books of Samuel would have had access to original written source materials like the book of Jasher and the royal court records, and then compiled them. In ancient times, these kinds of texts were reserved only for high-ranking nobles and Levites. So, our author was most certainly among or in direct service to the leaders of Israel in his day. Knowing that our author compiled various sources is important because it affects the interpretation of the books of Samuel in a number of ways. For instance, it helps us understand several literary qualities of the book of Samuel. When we read this book, it is difficult to deny that different passages represent significantly different literary styles. More than this, his use of sources also explains why the storyline of this book often doesn't flow as smoothly as we may like. At times, our book appears quite disjointed. The use of sources also helps us understand why the book repeats similar materials on occasion. Beyond this, our author's reliance on written sources clarifies certain temporal references that appear in the books of Samuel. On at least 7 occasions, the books of Samuel mentions that certain circumstances continue to be true to this day. This does not speak of the time of the book's final compilation, but of the time when the original sources were written. The below are some instances where the phrase "to this day" has been just added in the compilation from the various sources. 1 Samuel chapter 5 verse 5, chapter 6 verse 18, chapter 27 verse 6, and chapter 30 verse 25. In addition, the author edited and incorporated his own editorial comments in the previously written materials into this book. Example, 1 Samuel chapter 9 verse 9. Here the author equates the seer in the original records to the prophet as he is called during the time of his final compilation. Theme: God's kingship. God is king of the universe and always has been. No human king can assume kingship except as a representative of the divine king. God's provident and personal guidance. God providentially and individually guided the lives of chosen people such as Hannah, Samuel, Saul, and David. God's timing is always perfect. As is seen in 1 Samuel 9:16, about this time tomorrow I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. And in 1 Samuel 23, God tells the perfect time to go against the Philistines and also the perfect time to meet Saul. For God is the Lord of history. God's sovereign will and purpose. God chooses and rejects people according to his own sovereign will and purpose. He may change his way of dealing with individuals according to his plan and purpose, but his decision is always right and just. At the same time, he is merciful and gracious. Key verses in 1 Samuel. Let us see the 4 key verses in Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 2 verse 2, chapter 15 verse 22, chapter 16 verse 7, and chapter 30 verse 6. These key verses show how the holy God's standards and expectations are different from that of man's. God looks at our heart, so we can find strength in the Lord our God. Contents of 1 Samuel. The contents of the book of 1 Samuel are centered around 3 prominent Israelite leaders: Samuel, Saul, and David. Chapters 1 to 7 recount the actions of Samuel, the righteous priest, prophet, and judge. Samuel combines the offices of judge and prophets. As is said in Acts 13:20, Samuel was the last of Israel's judges and the first of its prophets, as said in Acts 3:24. Chapters 8 to 15. These chapters focus on Saul, the first king of Israel. Here we find the account of transition from one form of government to another. Theocracy, God's kingly rule over his people, a country run by God, to a monarchy, a country led by human royalty. Chapters 16 to 31 describe the rise of David. It's an account of the transition of kingship from Saul to David. It's interesting to see some excellent phrases in the book of 1 Samuel. They are Ichabod, meaning no glory. The glory has departed from Israel. Chapter 4 verse 21. Ebenezer. This means the helper. God helps us up to now. Chapter 7 verse 12. Long live the King. Chapter 10 verse 24. Lord of hosts. Chapter 1 verse 3. These phrases are first used in the Bible in the book of 1 Samuel. Events from the book of Samuel that have been explicitly referred in the New Testament. There are 58 New Testament references to David. Paul states that Jesus is descended from David according to the flesh, Romans 1:3. While Jesus himself is recorded by John as saying, I am the root and the offspring of David, Revelation 22 verse 16. Many interpreters have noted that Mary's song of praise to God in Luke 1:46 to 55 parallel Hannah's song of praise for the birth of Samuel found in 1 Samuel 2:1 to 10. In Luke 2:52, Luke wrote that Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. In 1 Samuel 2:26, we read that the boy Samuel continued to grow both in stature and in favor with the Lord and also with man. In Luke chapter 6, 1 to 5, Luke recorded how the Pharisees persuaded Jesus and accused him and his disciples of breaking the Sabbath. Here, Jesus defended his action by comparing himself to David, as is said in 1 Samuel chapter 21 verses 1 to 6, when David and his men ate the holy bread before the Lord while they were being persuaded by Saul. And finally, Luke in Acts 2:14 to 41 tells about David's enduring kingship. God had sworn with an oath to David that he would set one of his descendants on his throne, and David foresaw and spoke about the resurrection of Christ. Acts chapter 2 verse 30 and 31. In Genesis 49, 8 to 10, in Jacob's blessing to Judah, he blessed that the scepter, a symbol of kings, will not depart from Judah. This was fulfilled by the Messiah, Jesus Christ, a descendant of David of the tribe of Judah. Conclusion. In Hannah's song of praise, she confidently says in 1 Samuel 2:10 that the Lord will judge the ends of the earth. Throughout his book, the author of Samuel called on his audience to follow Hannah's example. Despite the trials they faced, Israel was to renew their confidence that 1. The kingdom of God will spread throughout the world. 2. Christ will return in glory to judge the ends of the earth.